If you had the opportunity to live in a children's wonderland, would you choose anywhere else? We don't just say, we do. It's the Stain City way.
Good afternoon, my name is Anele and welcome to Real Talk on SABC3. The stage is yours. Last week, we unpacked the very serious topic of femicide, and as we continue to address matters that force us as a society to come to terms with what plagues us, this week we turn our focus onto another heart-wrenching matter, male sexual abuse and rape. These atrocities are rarely addressed, and most of its victims suffer in silence for fear of being judged. Joining me today, a founder of South African Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse, Sosa, and survivor of sexual abuse and rape, Rees Mann, Deborah Hoshong, representing the Tears Foundation, and a survivor of sexual abuse herself, and counselling psychologist Lorenzo Stride. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for your time. I'm pretty sure that this is something you're used to doing, and now on a national platform, I think your voice is needed. Deborah, I want to start with you. I know that we're discussing sexual abuse, male sexual abuse as a whole, but I want to get a broader picture. I mean, the Tears Foundation says 13,800 children are sexually abused each year, and 2 out of 5 male learners will be raped in their lifetime. Are these numbers accurate? Where are we getting these stats?
Anele, statistics are what we make of it. We must remember, on a lighter note, that 89% of statistics are untrue.
Okay.
Are made up.
Okay.
And we actually don't have a very good method in South Africa to gather all of the statistics because there are so many organizations working on the subject, with the subject, so they each have their own thing, and then the statistics that is available usually comes from the police department, and how representative of the reality that is, we don't really know.
So would you say it's more or less, or a lot more, or a lot less?
I think it's a lot more because of the fact that very few children actually speak out because of various reasons. There's fear that they won't be believed, fear that they are being threatened, and all sorts of things. In fact, UCT did a survey last year, over 3 years, and they released the statistics last year. And 19 point something % of children in South Africa, according to that survey, have been exposed to sexual abuse in some form or another, be it penetrative or non-penetrative. And that is including boys and girls, and the figures actually show that they are very similar for girls and boys.
Oh, okay. Lorenzo, let me come to you, because I mean, when you hear about these things, you're just like, oh, what a monster, you know, who would do this? And as a psychologist, you know, in your learnings, why do people sexually abuse? Why do people rape?
The thing with rape and sexual abuse is really less about sex and more about power.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people feel that they have to enforce their masculinity and enforce their power, and that's mostly why people rape. I'm not saying that it's not sexual at all, but it's mostly about power, men and women alike.
And I mean, like she says that, you know, the stats are pretty much balanced.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah, Rees, this is the second time you're here, and I'd said to you, you're going to come back because we have to discuss this. It just feels like the prevalence is just getting higher and higher. What's going on? Are we more aware of it? Is it getting reported more? Is the media reporting on it more? Or are the numbers just simply rising?
We look at international, what's happening around the world.
Yeah.
And I don't think the numbers have been quite consistent around the world.
Yeah.
It's just that now people are starting to talk about it in South Africa. Before, this was nobody spoke about it. This was a taboo subject. Males, in most people's perception, is males will not be sexually abused. Again, because of the masculinity how we brought up. And that males being raped was absolutely impossible by 2 things. Number one is society believed it, and prior to 2007, before we had the act, males could not be raped. There was no legal aspect whatsoever for males being raped. It was indecent assault.
Deborah, you touched on something. You said that, you know, this is the stats that South Africa has, and, you know, we've got a different way of measuring it to the rest of the world. In your opinion, around the rest of the world, who is doing it properly in terms of we should be looking to them when it comes, and now not the healing part, not the prevention part, just simply the data capturing of it?
I think Australia is pretty on par with what they're doing, as well as America. All of the stats that I look at, if I go and look for stats, it's either American or Australian. And they seem to have a system that works well. And I think we should somehow, somewhere, somebody needs to go and find out how they do it so that we can get our act together. We have so many small organizations doing their own thing, and there isn't much collaboration amongst, and that's quite sad, because we're really losing out, because each one does their thing and does it well, but we need some form of collaboration between all of the organizations working with male, female, children, adults, survivors. We just need to do something. It's so frustrating that things seem to be getting worse. But as far as, I mean, I was abused when I was in between the ages of 9 and 16, and that was way back, many years ago. I mean,
20 years ago.
Long ago, no, 30, maybe more.
32.
No, I'm 57 right now. So it's been happening for ages. And when I spoke to my aunt, saying to her, but why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you do anything? And she said, I was also touched as a child. And
do you see us like being desensitized to it? Because I mean, that's just being, you know, so what? We'll all touch the children. We'll all get through it and we're fine. As a psychologist, you see us, you know.
I don't think it's desensitization. I think it's more like it's happened to me, or these things happen, keep quiet about it. I think it's secrecy more and stigmatization more than desensitization.
And socialization, because it's become part of our society. It happens to everybody.
Rees, do you want to jump in here?
I mean, specifically, I can only speak about males because that's our area of this. I mean, males has got the secrecy that they don't want to do it. Specifically in an all-male environment. In all-male environment, men are not empathetic to each other. Men don't talk to each other. You know, men, if they have a conversation, they're always fine. So speaking about these type of things is totally taboo in South African society, or in a male-dominated patriarchal society, which we've got. So males are too scared to come forward because of the reasons, and even like with women, they might share experiences. Males, if a male came forward, he is. And the other male might have had similar experience. He's probably not going to share it. They internalize it, and they internalize it a lot longer. Because most of our males are coming and for assistance and for help 20 years after the event.
Because they've bottled it up, and then it just becomes too much, and it manifests itself in different ways.
And it's normally a catastrophe. Like it's normally when they hit rock bottom, or somebody forces them to go, or something's happened socially where they have no choice but to look at it.
Okay. Listen, a big problem that victims of sexual abuse contend with is the stigma and judgments imposed on them by society. We've touched on it a bit. I think we should unpack it a little bit more after the break. Stay with us. And welcome back to Real Talk. My guests today are counselling psychologist Lorenzo Stride, trainer and educator with the Tears Foundation, Deborah Hoshung, and founder of Samsosa, Rees Mann, to unpack the topic of male sexual abuse. Rees, I'm going to come to you. What is the danger in this notion and this assumption that men are hyper-sexualized anyway? They're highly sexual creatures. So is there a danger in that when it comes to them reporting that they have been sexually violated?
I mean, first of all, I don't see the perception that males are highly sexed. I mean, as humans, we are sexual animals, or we're a sexual species amongst itself. And I think the danger is in what other people perceive and what society perceives the male role should be.
Absolutely.
And it is not the reality. Society has determined exactly how males should behave. Males are brought up that we're supposed to be able to protect ourselves. Males are supposed to be powerful. Males are not supposed to show emotions. So it's all of these things that are internalized and we keep quiet about. That's the issue, not the issue about the, being hypersexual happens to males and it happens
females.
to females.
Yeah.
It can take place between both of the sexes. So I think the notion of males actually dominating the sexual arena is actually society driven itself, because that's what society expect of males.
Lorenzo, you said absolutely while Rees was talking.
Yes, I think that we celebrate men's sexuality. My boy's going to do this to all the chicks.
Yeah,
You know, like we celebrate that. With girls, we try to subdue it.
Yeah.
So with men, if you're hypersexual, it's celebrated and it's okay for you to do X, Y, and Z. So it's almost expected.
And
We
if you're a
socialize,
female, you're a
domesticate.
little bit dirty.
You need to be with your legs closed. You need to sit a certain way. Be a lady. But it's okay for a man to be a stud. You see. And I think that kind of thinking perpetuates a lot of sexual abuse.
Deborah, off the back end of what Lorenzo is saying is that type of thinking perpetuates sexual abuse. When it comes to males, right, and when it comes to male and male rape, what are the different reactions in your experience have you seen when it comes to a man saying he was raped by a woman, or when a man says I was raped by a man?
Oh, usually it's shame, and I think that's across the board. And therein lies the reluctance for anybody to report, be it male or female. There's always the shame attached, and the first thing people say to you, it wasn't your fault. You know, that doesn't really go a long way to appease what I feel and what I experienced. But it's such a difficult topic. The underlying, the psychological effects, the emotional effects that kind of violation has on one, be it male or female, it's horrendous. And you know, I get so frustrated because there is my approach to all of us is education. We need to re-educate people. This silence and the taboo about speaking about the rape and abuse really it only perpetuates the whole.
And I think from a male perspective, it is the blame, the shame, but it's the blame. It's self-blame.
Yeah.
They blame themselves for themselves. Why didn't they protect themselves? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And that's the 3 F's, you know, and a lot of males don't quite understand that their choices in their subconscious mind is flee, right? Fight, and the other one is freeze. Is as a species, we want to live for the next day. So psychologically and in your subconscious, you might just freeze in that situation. But again, the men are supposed to be able to fight. Men are supposed to be able to run and being able to get away from trouble. And then they land in a situation and then they freeze. Then what happens is they blame themselves. And a lot of males
should have done this.
And a lot of males that we deal with mainly are blaming themselves more for the circumstances and situation than the perpetrator themselves.
Yeah.
Can I just say, with shame, sorry, you also your body reacts to the stimulation when you're being raped as a man. So there is pleasure, you know. So you internalize You internalize that, and you go, was I responsible for that? Why did my body respond like that? But it's a normal bodily response, you know. So that's also partly why men go underground with not speaking up about it, because I experienced a measure of pleasure. So your body's completely betrayed you. The person has violated you, but there was
now you've
a
forgotten
certain
the
amount
violation
of
and
pleasure. So you go like, did I really enjoy that, or why did my body respond like that? So that contributes to why we just don't talk about it. because
And on top of that blame, self-blame that
Yes.
we experience, we have people out there telling us that we were weak, that we are weak.
and you should have protected yourself like you.
And well, who was that made that statement? I mean, it's horrendous. Yeah, you have somebody in a high position in government saying, oh, the victim was weak.
Sure.
Deborah, you touched on something, and I want to go around the table with this one, where you're saying when somebody says to you that they've been sexually violated, and the first thing, if somebody comes to me, it's like, oh, shame, you know, sorry this happened to you, and you almost don't want people to feel that shame for you, which is why it's not reported. In us moving forward, because I don't want to do this thing where we just always talk around it, in us moving forward, and I want everyone to answer this because you've all got your own certain set of expertise when it comes to this. What is the ideal statement out of my mouth, the first thing that should come out of my mouth when somebody comes to tell me that they've been violated?
Okay, I'm going to put you in my position
Yes.
as a 9-year-old child, 9-year-old girl that was violated. And if I had gone to my guardian, I wasn't with my mother at the time, to my aunt and said to her what had happened, what I want her to say is, I love you, I believe you, and she must hold me in her arms and say, I will keep you safe and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. That's what I needed and that's what I wanted.
And you didn't get that.
But I didn't get that, and nobody gets that. Because, first of all, we do not believe kids, because in my aunt's case, ooh, what are the neighbors going to say? And what are the family going to say? And because this is a family member that's done this to me, I don't want other people to know what kind of family we are. And that's what it's all about. It's protecting the self-interest instead of embracing that child and saying, my child, I love you, I believe you, and now we'll take care of you.
It's a PR campaign instead of a healing campaign. Rees?
I think for most males, it's the belief.
Yeah.
So I believe. And the second thing is the support that we need. So it's I believe, and I'm here to support you. I'm here to listen to you. And I think it's opening the doors, because most males, they need somebody to react in such a way that they're opening the door for them to be able to open up. So so the first one is I believe you, and the second one is I'm here to support you.
Before we go to an ad break, how do you answer that?
I think that it's important to help people realize that they are worthy of having their emotions validated, because that experience was real, and we need to help them feel that we see them and it's okay for them to have those feelings, and then help them through it.
All right, so this conversation continues. Rees is staying with us, Lorenzo is staying with us. Deborah, thank you so much for your time. Really, you do wonderful work. She's from the Tears Foundation, who transform education around rape and sexual abuse. Coming up next, 2 men who've been brave enough to come and share their accounts of sexual abuse and rape. We will hear from them next. Welcome back to Real Talk on SABC3. The stage is yours. When we first met Rees Mann on our show, it was on the back of a news story referring to a water polo coach from Parktown Boys High who was accused of sexually abusing over 20 pupils at the school. For Rees, the story hit too close to home. Let's have a look.
I came to start my organization because at the age of 39, things just got too bad for me. And I was sexually abused as a child. As also by a sports coach, and then as a young adult, I was gang raped, and I actually felt that I felt and didn't speak about it because of all these myths. I felt alone. I thought I was the only person in the world that this had happened to, and I found there was nowhere where I could talk out. There was no support groups. There was no peer. Alcoholics have Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's peer. Drug addicts can talk to a recovering drug addict. A male who's been sexually abused is not coming forward. And a lot
You
of
don't
the males
talk about it, you must toughen up.
Yes, and a lot of the males we have are normally about the age of 35, and they're talking about it 20 years after the event. So they've left with that secret and the anxiety and the trauma for 20 years.
Also joining the conversation is Nsika Hlbu, here to share his story as well. Gentlemen, thank you to you both. Rees, I'm going to start with you. You know, Lorenzo made such a good point earlier. He said that the only time that you find that you need to address that, you know, you were sexually violated, you were raped as a man, is when you hit catastrophe, right? When you hit rock bottom. Can you walk us through what that was for you?
For me, it was parenthood as a father. And I was very concerned the way I was behaving as a father because I was very strict. My daughters never slept out. I was very suspicious of everybody around them. And I was very concerned as a father that my behaviors because of my past are then going to influence my children. So they had very little freedoms. And fortunately for me, before I'd even spoken about it, I've been on the net and I found chat rooms and I found places where fellow males were talking. So for me it was a pre-education that the signs, I was a fortunate person that the signs were there for my behavior before I hit really rock bottom, that I knew the signs were there. And I was very worried because for me, my children are everything. And as I said before, I mean, I married my sweetheart childhood from the age of 14. We're still married. And I was starting to be concerned that this was like a can of worms that opened for me. And then I used to have sleep paralysis. I used to wake up and I used to feel myself wide awake. My eyes were awake. I could see everything around me, but I couldn't move. And eventually my wife would hear me going, and she would wake me up and get me out of the situation. But I didn't join the dots. And for me, speaking about it, to me was so important because I could start joining the dots. So why was I always afraid of an all-male environment? All of a sudden, it joined the dots. Why? For myself on a personal level, I always have made myself taken all the hair off my back. And I never knew why I always had to have my back shaved, and I never understood why.
Anything masculine,
And then I only realized afterwards, and it's again joining the dots, but putting this jigsaw puzzle together, which is part of the recovery, is then I realized one of my rapists was hairy. And we're talking, it's taken 30 years for me to understand one of my behaviors. Now, I was one of the fortunate ones. I mean, a lot of males who we deal with have drug abuse. They start having addiction to alcohol, and they start losing their jobs. Behavioral changes can be extreme. And I just think I was fortunate in that I starting to investigate and look on the international websites and all of that for help and all of.
Nsika, can I go to Nsika's chick so you're not just sitting there and be like, wow, this is a great conversation. You were just 4 years old when you first were sexually violated. Can you talk us through that?
So what would happen is when I was 4 years old, I'd be in the bath with my cousin, who was 3 or 4 years older than me, and he would fondle me while in the bath. I did tell my aunt about it, and my aunt just made a joke of it. And for a long time, I didn't acknowledge it because she never acknowledged it, and I didn't think it would have any impact on me.
Because obviously she's the adult, so you are following adults. Because when you're a child, adults are right.
For sure. So I just thought, this thing. And then later on in life, I started having problems. I became sexually anorectic, which means I just didn't want to have sex. Or, so it started to also mess up with my relationships that I would have with women as well. So and then I started to look at this pattern of behavior, and then I started to join the dots, and I started writing and journaling, and this is when all of these things started to come out for me.
Lorenzo?
Can you see with both, there's dissociation, there's trauma and there's dissociation, and then later in life, all of the kind of, I can't swear, hey, all of the things come out. All of the things come out, it's like a pressure cooker. And then it has to be dealt with. If we take Nsika, there is a possibility that his cousin was also abused because he was much younger. And then if you take Rees, complete dissociation, and then not recognizing that the person who violated me was hairy, not understanding why I'm doing this, and also hyper-vigilant about his own kids. Very understandable.
Rees, do you have any boys?
No.
So it's just girls?
I had girls, and one of the regrets I had is I always hoped is that I didn't have more children. But after having 2 girls, I felt I was very happy that I had children. My fear, and it's, I feel very guilty about it, that specific fear, that because I had these daughters and I could protect them, that if we had more children, if I wanted to have more children and it was a boy, how would I have behaved in protecting him?
Yes. Who was the first person you opened up to? This is to both of you. Who was the first person you opened up to when you hit the rock bottom and you decided, you know what, this is something that I have to face?
Mine was a professional psychologist that I actually, and it took about 10 sessions before, and again, this is males, wanted to, but held back all the time. Wanted to, held back, and it was about 10 sessions that before I actually started speaking about it. But it's a long process. You know, it's not a matter, and the recovery, you know, it's not healing because we still have setbacks throughout our life. It's that recovery that it takes a long time and you need a lot of support. See, I was fortunate is that when I did eventually tell my wife, I mean, that was like, I was absolutely petrified. And then, and then to tell her the story, but the feedback that I got back from her was so different. Where I have shared my story to some people, and I've actually got total disbelief.
Yeah.
People totally, I don't want sympathy, but totally unempathetic. No empathy from them whatsoever, and the absolute silence. Where I told certain people, and they asked me questions. All of a sudden, by asking me a question, I feel that they're accepting. They're accepting.
Who was the first person you opened up to?
For me, it was a counselor at the time, and that was the first person I spoke to, and subsequently to that, I then spoke to my parents about it as well. And it had been very difficult for all in the family. I think it was something that I think even my parents, even now, I think they struggle in terms of saying, did we do enough to protect our child and all of that. And it's been a journey of healing, but it's been difficult for the family because the family has to heal together as well. But yeah, the first
and your aunt?
My aunt passed away, I think, when I was 10.
Okay.
So I have never had that closure, and that side of the family, we are not close to them at all anymore. So I haven't actually confronted my cousin about this thing.
So you're still in the process of doing that?
I'm not sure if I'm in the frame of mind right now as I speak. I don't know if I could. There's a part of me that I'm not sure if I would be able to say the things I want to say, or whether I'd react in a way that would be considered normal.
Considered normal. Okay. Gentlemen, I'm sure there are people out there wrestling with similar demons to the stories you guys have just shared, and you've really provided them with their own platform. And the fact that you're saying, I'm not healed, I'm in the process of doing it, I think it's actually it gives people even more hope that, you know, here's somebody who's brave enough to come on TV nationally and talk about it. So there's hope for me. Thank you so much for your time. We continue with the conversation after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Today we're asking tough questions about the scourge of sexual abuse and rape. We're looking into how crimes of this nature are handled differently when the victims are men. It's one thing suffering through sexual abuse and rape. It's something else to then go to the police station to report it. Joining me now, our spokesperson for the South African Police Service, Colonel Aleta Silepe, and Dr. Kgamadi Kometsi, who represents the Department of Correctional Services as the Director of Psychology Services. Colonel, I don't want to say Colonel, because people will never forgive me. Colonel Silepe, when it comes to reporting being violated sexual crimes, is there a different way in which our officers are trained to handle it if it's a man, if it's a woman, or if it's a child?
Thanks, Anele, for having me. Anele, I can say there's no different way. Because all victims must be treated with respect, with dignity and respect. Remember, at our police stations, we do have private rooms where we interview victims of gender-based violence in private. So our police officers have been trained on how to deal with victims who are children, and they've been trained for victims who are adults, whether male or female. The reason why we are having these victim-friendly rooms, which is a private room at the police station, is that it's private, and imagine dealing with sexual offenses. It's confidential. It's a very sensitive matter. That is why we are taking our victims to these private rooms.
when it comes to children, is there a way to report it by not even going to the police station? Because I mean, police station is not exactly the shiniest, sunniest place to be in. And I mean, an 8-year-old child, you don't really want them in a police station.
Yes, that is true, Anele. Sometimes our victims, they will call through our police station or through a 1011, or somebody else can call the police. Then the police will go out to the victim, where the victim is.
Oh, I don't think people are aware that that's an option that's available to them.
Yes.
Okay. So here's a tweet from Wandile Mdana. It says, most cases aren't reported because some fear stigma of being intimidated by family members, but need loving hearts when they report it. Now, I want to ask you, if I know of somebody, like a child, a minor, can I report the violation on their behalf?
That is true, Anele.
Okay.
You can report. Actually, it's an obligation according to the Sexual Offences Act or the Domestic Violence Act. If you know that somebody has been violated or there is a crime that has been committed against that person, we can report. Remember, at the end of the day, we are going to collect information from you or obtain information from you, then we'll make a follow-up so that we can obtain from the child, obviously with the parent or the guardian.
Dr. Kgamadi, when we look at our prisons and our jails from a correctional services point of view, I mean, it's something we hear all the time, that rape in jails and prisons is quite rife. What's happening in the prisons?
First and foremost, we provide interventions for all people that have been convicted that are serving their sentences with correctional services. Does it happen in, within the correctional facilities? Look, the correctional facility, like most of other institutions, custodial institutions within the Republic, represent a microcosm of society out there. So what happens out there, is likely to happen, within our correctional facilities as well. However, we've got measures that have been put in place to make sure that we respond appropriately, firstly to people who have been convicted of sexual crimes, but also to people who might commit those crimes while incarcerated as well. From the medical, side of the spectrum, all the way to, to counselling, to make sure that we respond to the victim, and we also deal with the perpetrator and provide the relevant services to both of them. Because
what I find that as a society, we forget about correctional services, that people are actually sent there to rehabilitate, right?
That's true.
That's what you want, actually. You're not sending them to be, you are all monsters, go hang out as monsters together. You want them to go there to rehabilitate. What about the fact that you will go into the prison and you are then a sexual offender, and that's why you're going into prison, and then you get there and then you are sexually violated?
One of the most important things that we do from the very beginning, when one gets admitted to our centers, is that we compile what is called the correctional sentence plan. That is basically an assessment that assesses this person, what are the risks, what are the needs, and so on, and on what would be the appropriate interventions that should be geared towards this person and addressing the criminal behavior that they have presented with. But as I have said, also the needs, the vulnerabilities, and so on and on. So it's very unlikely. Where possible, we try by all means to make sure that those who are vulnerable will not be enclosed with those that might, violate them at some point. So the correctional sentence plan assists us in regard to making decisions as to what interventions to bring about, and where to accommodate these offenders once they're incarcerated.
Okay, let's talk about reporting everything. I'll come to how people reported in prison when they've been sexually violated. I want to come to you, Colonel Selepe. Yes. It's common knowledge. People are like, I went to the police station to report either I was beaten up by my husband, I was raped, sometimes by my boyfriend, and the cops are like, go and talk it out. We understand that there's an issue with sensitivity when it comes to us reporting sexual crimes. Yes. What are we doing to fix that?
Anele, that's very sad. Earlier on, I've mentioned that, as our victims, our police officers have been trained that immediately when victims come to our police station or they're being called out for such cases, they must treat them with respect and dignity. One of the issues that we also educating our members is that when they arrive, remember our police stations, it's just a counter where our victims are being interviewed. These rooms are there for that purpose, that it's a private room, you must be interviewed there, not with other people who are reporting, other cases, intimidation or
But what about
housebreaking.
a man reporting that he's been raped by a woman?
That the same applies. That is why I'm saying to you, Anele, you know, at this private room, remember it will be the police officer and the person who's been interviewed. And remember, Sexual Offences Act also is saying that if you want to report, or a person wants to report the case, you can be accompanied by a friend or a relative or whoever. It doesn't mean you have to be alone. Remember, it's sensitive, and sometimes our victims will be traumatized even to speak.
Yeah.
So we allow them to take it all out, maybe to cry. That is why that private room, that private space is there. So that after the person has cooled down, then you obtain the statement and the case will be forwarded to the detectives who will investigate further.
Are the police put through like sensitive courses, for lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, you can say that.
Okay.
Remember, Anel, we have our victim empowerment program. We also have a 5-day course where members have been trained on victim empowerment, how to treat victims, how to provide information to our victims. And we also motivate our victims, you know, educate our victims through our awareness campaigns that when you go to a police station and you can see that you are not being treated fairly, you must ask the police officer, I want to be interviewed in private. So if our victims don't know about that, then they will either turn away and not report it, or, you know.
Dr. Kgamadi, I've literally got 30 seconds left. Inside the prisons, and a man has been sexually violated, what is the reporting procedure?
Our officials have been trained to handle this quite sensitively. And like I said, depending on how it is assessed, the person who is reporting, because they might actually be violated further, you know, if they are put back to that same unit where they were, they might be put in housed in a different unit, but there is sensitization, and there are professional social workers, psychologists that assist with responding to the reporting.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. You are staying on, you are leaving us. Thank you so much for your time. It was nice to get some clarity from SAPS. When we return, we find out about the rehabilitation programs currently being used in South African jails for perpetrators of sexual abuse and rape. And welcome back to Real Talk with me, Anele. It's one of the worst nightmares coming to life for a parent who learns their child has been sexually violated. The question is, what should you do when faced with this reality? Rees Mann, founder of SAPS, and Lorenzo Stride, who's a psychologist, are both back to answer some of the questions for us. Before that, though, Dr. Kgamadi, let me begin with you. You were speaking about the programs that you're currently running in correctional services.
Yes.
Do you find that they've been successful? Or is it too early to tell?
Like any intervention, you know, it works with some people. With some people, it doesn't matter how well it is presented. It might not work. But then what ameliorates that is that there is a correctional sentence plan, which is an assessment process that ensures that we target the behavior that has landed the person into the correctional facilities in the first place. They work with some people.
Now, I don't know if this next question is going to get you into trouble, but I'm going to go in and say it anyway, and you can put your hands up and say, no, thank you, I'm not going to answer that.
Let's see.
A lot of people, you know, obviously in the last 3-4 weeks with the femicide and all of that have said, let's just bring back the death penalty. Now, as somebody who works in correctional services, and you are dealing with what we deem as these monsters, what is your take on that?
Our mandate is to look after people who have been convicted, to ensure that they get the required rehabilitation that they desire, that they need, basically. We cannot start saying that, you know, for this particular crime we will provide rehabilitation, and for other crimes we will not. We are a human rights, you know, based society. A death penalty against that background is not something that is necessarily desirable. Yeah.
All right, Lorenzo, let me come to you. In, you know, facing sexual violence, in your experience, what happens first? Do I report it to the police first? Do I look for medical examination first? Do I get a lawyer first? You know,
I don't think a lawyer first.
no, definitely not a lawyer then. Okay.
No, I think it's important to talk about it, you know, and then the family can decide whether they need to press charges or they can seek psychological assistance. But we need to create spaces where people feel safe enough to talk, because if it goes underground and it goes deeply seated into the recesses of your brain or your being, it comes out sideways like peanut butter from a sandwich at some point, you know, and it has to be dealt with at some point. So talk.
Rees,
I'm answering you.
you said that, you know, when it happens, and because it's happened to you, you keep quiet, no one's going to believe you, they believe the adult. If my child is quiet, like, and I can see that something is not on, what are the telltale signs that I must look for as a parent?
Okay, it's very difficult
course.
as a parent. I mean, the most important thing is you have to have communication and open communication with your child. Because if a child is just withdrawn, it could be just that they're bullied at school. So you would look at, and I think Lorenzo is more of an expert than I am, but you would look at trends that have changed. So if your child never wet their bed before, and all of a sudden now at the age of 11 they're wetting their bed, that is a major change in their behavior. If they were, and language, I always find that parents can start picking it up quite easily with language. If the child uses language about sexuality and something that is inappropriate to their age, where did they learn it? If the child is playing games that is inappropriate to their age. So if they're playing teddy bears, for example, and Barbie and Ken, and Barbie and Ken are doing things that normal child would not have yet come or understood. And these are the telltale signs that something is happening. But again, it's your communication that you got with the child. If you know your child well and you're seeing these changes, that is the alarm bells must be ringing.
Am I correct in saying that, you know, he says communication, but it can't start when I see that there's something wrong?
It has to be there.
Okay.
But also, we should be careful to not catastrophize. Children do have a sexuality, and some kids do play with their privates, and that's okay. Yeah. When it becomes worrying is when it is completely overt and they're inviting other kids into the play or playing with their dolls in a certain way.
Okay. And what if, I mean, you're the elder in the situation and your child has told you now, you finally gotten out of them, and their first thing is, please do not tell anyone, or do not tell, if I'm the mother, they say, please do not tell daddy, or if you are the daddy, please do not tell mommy, do not tell anyone. You know, what's your process?
I mean, we always think that the person has got a lot of rights themselves. They have been disempowered by somebody abusing them. We believe in empowering the individual. And I mean, I deal with a lot of adults. So we believe in empowering them and saying, the choice is yours. And again, I'm talking from an adult perspective.
Okay.
So when they were sexually abused as a child, now they're adult. The choice is yours, what to do. These are your options. And I think even children, and it depends on their age, it should be explained to them what their options are. But the secrecy of, and this is for me is on a personal level in dealing with a lot of males, the secrecy is that cancer that boils on. So don't tell is exactly what the perpetrator wanted.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So not telling is actually giving and it's giving the perpetrator all the power. And I found that when I told my story, and the first time I actually told my story publicly, I had evicted the perpetrator. The perpetrators lost all their power over me, all their power over my actions, all the power over my thought. But again, I don't want to talk about children because it's not my area of expertise, and that I'd rather leave for people who are specifically trained in that field.
I'll come back to Lorenzo. Dr. Kgamadi, you said that when in prison and they are reporting that they've been sexually violated, you guys can remove them from that environment.
And it doesn't apply only to instances where there has been a sexual violation.
Just violence in
Where
general.
violence has happened, we do whatever is possible to try and remove the person from the point of vulnerability, from the point where they are being violated. Where possible, and we make sure, like I said, we make sure that they get to be seen by the medical staff, and they receive the counselling that they require. But then we've got a dual responsibility there as well, because now we have got suddenly this perpetrator who
are they also removed from the society in jail?
They would not necessarily be removed, but they would have to be assessed and given the interventions that they require. But you must remember that sexual violation is a crime. So if it happens, behind bars, basically, while a person is incarcerated. It means that it's a crime that has to be reported to the criminal justice system, and then the whole process goes on there as well. So they might end up being convicted on top of their
on top
current,
of what they're already serving.
They might end up, and everyone, you know, the officials have been trained to deal with that.
All right, we're almost running out of time. Rees,
The dynamics within jail is totally different. Because outside we can be removed from our perpetrator. In prison, you would go exactly to the same cell as your perpetrator, and then your life could be in danger. So prison rape and rape that happens within prison, specifically within the number gangs, there's an added power and dynamics going into it, because you're mixing on a daily basis with your perpetrators, and you can't. And if you speak out. What are the perpetrators going to do?
Guys, we could talk forever. We're out of time. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having
I
us.
know you wanted to say something,
did,
but I'm being
but
told
cool.
we must go. Rees, thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you so much, Dr. Kgamadi. Thank you to all my guests. This was a very tough one, but a necessary real talk. Speaking of talking, you have to talk to your children. Like Dr. Lorenzo said, the one thing to do is to make sure that the communication lines are open at all times, so that by the time this does happen, if it happens, it's easy for them to come to you and tell them what's going on. Talk to them and hear them. Good night.